Coming up today, hundreds of schools remain shut and more than 2,000 people are still in quarantine. But the World Health Organization says Korea is getting a handle on the MERS outbreak. Prime Minister nominee Hwang Kyo-ahn faces the final day of his confirmation hearing as the ruling party aims to have him in place before President Park makes her trip to the US. Plus, the Japanese official behind a landmark apology to the victims has reaffirmed that the Japanese military forcibly recruited women as sex slaves during World War II. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, June 10th here in Seoul. Thanks as always for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. We start with the latest on the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome or MERS outbreak in Korea. While public concern over the deadly virus is still ringing around the nation, a specialist from the World Health Organization says Korea's response has been aggressive and the situation is improving. At a briefing in Geneva on Tuesday, Peter Emberek said Korea is affected by a persistent infection, implying the MERS outbreak can be brought under control. The expert stressed that all subsequent infections in the country have occurred in healthcare facilities and have been traced to the original patient. Now, starting today, Korea's MERS Central Response Headquarters and the MERS Task Force team will run virus testing on all hospitalized pneumonia patients in regions where the virus has been tracked. If they test positive, any newly confirmed patients will be isolated in a one-person quarantine facility to prevent secondary and tertiary infections. Now, despite health officials' efforts, Koreans are still fearful of more MERS infections. Around 2,200 schools and preschools, more than 10% of schools nationwide, will remain closed temporarily to prevent an outbreak among students. In Korea, 95 patients have been confirmed with MERS and 7 patients have died since the outbreak began on May 20th. Nearly 3,000 people remain under quarantine. Now, after what many would say was a slow start, the Korean government has been working around the clock to eradicate the MERS virus. Assuring the public her administration will do all it can to contain the virus, President Park Geunhye urged the public to take the necessary precautions, but to continue going about their day-to-day lives as much as they possibly can. Our Chae-san reports.
At Tuesday's cabinet meeting, President Park Geunhye said the MERS outbreak should not put a damper on the Korean economy. She reassured the nation that the virus can be contained because it hasn't spread beyond the medical facilities into the general population.
국민 여러분께서도 마음이 불안하시겠지만 과민하게 반응해서 경제 활동이 위축되지 않도록 협조해 주시기를 바랍니다.
President Park then called on officials to take measures to minimize the virus's economic impact, such as by offering targeted support for businesses in the affected regions and industries. Stressing that patients can recover from a bout with MERS, the president asked the Korean people to report suspected cases of infection and to follow authorities' instructions after having come into contact with the virus.
정부와 의료계를 포함한 국민 모두가 합심해서 총력 대응해 나간다면 메르스를 빠른 시일 내에 종식시킬 수 있을 것입니다.
Looking ahead, President Park called for a system for responding and managing new types of diseases, especially in the era of globalization. Health authorities say the outbreak will hit a critical turning point in the coming days, and some members of both the ruling and opposition parties are urging the president to reschedule her U.S. visit next week. While President Park's spokesperson said there wasn't anything he could say about the upcoming trip, there's a possibility the president may decide to shorten it depending on developments in the outbreak. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
So, as we just heard there, President Park has been trying to reassure the public that the Korean economy will quickly bounce back from the MERS outbreak. But a government report released on Tuesday had a different outlook, suggesting MERS could have a big impact on domestic demand. Geunhye reports.
Korea's finance ministry says the job market isn't growing fast enough, and production and investment isn't getting better due to sluggish exports that have been falling over the past 5 months. Raising a degree of optimism is that domestic spending has been picking up. But with the MERS virus continuing to spread, there is concern that it won't last long. Although cheap oil prices have contributed to an on-month rise in department store and retail sales in May, experts say worries cannot be contained.
It's certain that this outbreak will worsen consumer sentiment in the short term. If the situation doesn't come to an end fast, it'll impact the overall economy, just like SARS or Ebola did.
The public sentiment, however, seems to be divided.
I usually have to try out cosmetics before I buy them, but I'm afraid of contracting the virus.
Since I can come into contact with many people in the public, I'll try to search online for what I need to buy.
Many years ago, I lived in the year of the SARS in Hong Kong, and it was much more serious than what I feel here in Korea.
To lessen the negative effects MERS may have on the rebounding consumption, domestic and foreign think tanks predict a key interest rate cut might be a solution. Geunhye, Arirang News.
The final session of a 3-day confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Hwang Kyo-ahn is scheduled for this Wednesday as the ruling Seonri Party tries to pass his appointment bill through the National Assembly before President Park heads off on her trip to the United States. During the second day on Tuesday, opposition lawmakers grilled Hwang based on 19 documents disclosed from the nominee's previous legal cases. Hwang, who is the current Justice Minister, dismissed allegations surrounding his involvement in a controversial special pardon during the former Lee Myung-bak administration in 2012, saying he merely shared his legal advice on the matter. Tuesday's afternoon session opened 5 hours behind schedule as opposition parties boycotted the session over Hwang's failure to submit some records. A former Japanese politician has reaffirmed that women from Korea and other countries were forcibly recruited as sex slaves for Japanese troops during World War II. During a discussion on Tuesday with former Prime Minister Tomiichi Murayama, former Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono brought up the case of Dutch women forced into sexual slavery while living in Indonesia, a former colony of the Netherlands. Kono said it was clear the Japanese military took them and made them serve as so-called comfort women, as Chief Cabinet Secretary Kono had issued a landmark apology to the victims in 1993. Senior officials from Korea and Japan held talks in Seoul on Tuesday to try and resolve a heated row over Tokyo's push to inscribe wartime industrial facilities that use Korean slave labor as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But with both sides failing to reach a compromise, they'll meet again later this month. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Tuesday's talks between Korea and Japan on Tokyo's controversial UNESCO bid centered on nailing down the specifics of a possible agreement.
The two sides exchanged views based on a document prepared by Korea, but there is still a gap since it was the first such discussion on documentation.
Tensions erupted when Tokyo sought to list 23 wartime industrial facilities as World Heritage Sites and marked them as being operational from 1850 to 1910. This angered Seoul since nearly 60,000 Koreans were forced to work at 7 of the sites during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the 1940s. A UNESCO advisory panel echoed Korea's view, saying Japan must ensure the entire history of the sites is known to visitors. Since the first round of talks in Tokyo last month, Japan said it will respect the panel's recommendation, but did not lay out the specific steps it plans to take. With no concrete outcome from the Seoul talks, the two sides plan to meet again in Tokyo later this month. Officials in Korea say the two sides will try to reach a compromise as requested by other UNESCO member countries. The final decision will be made during a meeting of the World Heritage Committee early next month in Germany. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now shifting our focus to North Korea now, and some local experts have been giving their thoughts on the current political climate in North Korea, and a handful of them say Kim Jong-un's days as leader could be numbered before too long. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
A group of North Korea experts gathered in Seoul. The Network for North Korean Human Democracy and Human Rights hosted the seminar on Tuesday with the aim to better analyze the stability of Pyongyang's current political structure.
Kim Jong-un's regime is very unstable, so he is executing numerous close aides. Also, the North's economic situation has been worsening, with foreign trade on the decline and no economic reform measures in place.
Experts say Kim Jong-un is struggling to maintain his grip on power. They say the situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. Some North Korean watchers and analysts predict it's just a matter of time before the regime leader is taken down from his powerful post.
In the first 3 years since Kim Jong-un took control, political, economic, and social problems have escalated, so there is a possibility of resistance, riot, and even a coup. Kim's power structure has weakened significantly compared to his predecessors. I believe within the next 5 years, the regime will be overturned.
Even if Kim is removed, experts say a new leader will emerge in his place and continue to push the communist regime. They say, meanwhile, that in terms of future unification of the peninsula, Seoul needs to think long-term and focus on building trust with the North Korean public by providing unconditional aid and support. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, as world powers struggle to deal with what is being called the worst refugee crisis in generations, some stark new figures have been released highlighting the sheer scale of the migrant crisis on the Mediterranean. The UN Refugee Agency said on Tuesday that so far this year alone, more than 100,000 migrants fleeing war and poverty in Africa have crossed the sea to Europe. Now, the vast majority of the migrants arrive in either Italy or Greece, and most of the people making the journey are packed into highly unsafe vessels run by smugglers. So far this year alone, more than 1,800 migrants have drowned trying to reach Europe. Now, with more revelations of corruption and bribery emerging from FIFA by the day, it seems, some have raised the possibility of Russia and Qatar being stripped of the right to hold the World Cup. But the embattled World Football governing body says tournaments will stay where they are. FIFA says there are no legal grounds to remove the hosting rights to the 2018 and 2022 World Cup competitions. This despite widespread speculation that bribery led to the awarding of soccer's biggest event to Russia and Qatar, this back in 2010. A FIFA official was quoted as saying both countries were awarded the World Cups by a democratic vote of FIFA's executive committee, and therefore the decision is final. Russia and Qatar both stressed their bids were clean and fair. Moscow has even gone as far as to suggest that the US wants Russia stripped of the World Cup because of its involvement in the Ukraine crisis. Well, that's all we have for now. Have a wonderful day, and thank you as always for watching. There are more ways to tune in to Arirang News and Arirang TV. You can either go to our website arirang.co.kr/news for the news, and we also have a smartphone application which you can download by going to the usual online markets. We do hope to see you at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.